Are you a North Carolina licensed real estate broker? And have you already taken your 2025-2026 update course, either the general update course or the broker in charge update course, and you have left the class feeling quite confused? Or have you not yet taken your update course and you want to be prepared? Or you are a pre-licensing student and you've left your class on agency quite confused. If that's the case, especially regarding something called seller sub-agency, you have come to the right place. Hi, I'm Kelly Allen. I'm the Education Director and owner of Cumbie and Troll School of Real Estate. And today, during this episode, we are going to review a very challenging topic, very challenging practice in North Carolina when it comes to real estate, called seller sub-agency. Let's dive in. The topic of seller sub-agency is apparently such a tricky subject that for this year's North Carolina Real Estate Commission update course, they have made the distinction in a way to help us know the difference between two types of seller sub-agency. Type 1 is within your brokerage, and that's going to be called brokerage sub-agency. The second type is outside of your brokerage, and that is called seller sub-agency. Now, before making this distinction, when I taught this topic, which is very confusing to most pre-licensing students, I said seller sub-agency can be practiced one of two ways, either inside of your brokerage or outside of your brokerage with a whole nother brokerage. You might be thinking, why does she keeps saying brokerage? Isn't it a firm? Isn't it a company? Well, the Real Estate Commission, they believe that words matter. And apparently not all brokerages are firms. And not all companies are firms. But if you say brokerage, that brokerage could be a firm or it could be a company. So they want us to now start calling places of work where brokerage activities take place a brokerage. Now that we've established that, let's dive in. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share a whiteboard. I'm going to draw out for you different scenarios, and then I will show you a diagram that one of my students created today in the middle of class using ChatGPT. I know we might have our feelings about the ChatGPT, but she put in a prompt and 30 seconds later, we have this great diagram that ChatGPT created for us showing how seller sub-agency works here in North Carolina. So give me just a moment and I will share my whiteboard. So let's title this sub-agency. And we know that there are two types of sub-agency. Two types. What are the two types? One is going to be called brokerage sub-agency. And that is within your company, firm, brokerage, within your brokerage. This one is pretty easy to grasp. I'm going to review it with you anyway, but it's pretty easy to get a hold of. It's this second one that causes trouble. The second one is called seller sub-agency. Seller sub-agency is outside of your brokerage. Thank you for putting up with my handwriting on this little whiteboard. outside of your brokerage with a totally different brokerage. This is the one that tends to be the sticky wicket. But we'll start with number one. So I'm going to clear my board. So if you want to write this down, go ahead and pause the video so you can write it down and then catch back up with me. So I'm going to clear my board and we're going to start with brokerage subagency. So let's title this mini lesson just what it's called. Brokerage subagency. And again, this is within or inside of your company, firm, brokerage. All right. So doing this review, we have to review other parts of agency and how it works. So let's say, for instance, that a brokerage is called, currently my pre-licensing class has named ourselves Premier Realty. Premier Realty is the brokerage, and in the eyes of the law in North Carolina, Premier Realty is the agent. I'm going to put a box around it, a little rectangle. Premier Realty, the brokerage, is the agent. Everyone affiliated within Premier Realty, let's draw little faces, everyone affiliated within Premier Realty is called a subagent, which is an agent of the agent. They are affiliated brokers. We know that because Premier Realty is the agent, all of the business that the affiliated brokers are permitted to do, all of that business technically belongs to the brokerage, which means that all of the buyers and sellers that are also working with these individual affiliated brokers, their agency agreements actually are with Premier Realty, the brokerage. So let's say that this person has a buyer, this person has a buyer, this affiliated broker has a buyer, so does this one. That one doesn't have any buyers. This person has a buyer, that affiliated broker. Green is for sellers. This person has a seller, this person has a seller, this person has a seller, known as a listing agreement. This person has a seller. This person only works with sellers. They don't want to deal with buyers at all. They just love sellers. They've got all sellers. This person's new and just has one buyer, one seller. Okay, very good. Now, let's pretend that, let me get a different color over here. Let's pretend that this broker is named, let's put here. This broker is named Jamella, broker Jamella. Okay. Now, broker Jamella, she has a buyer and a seller, and she knows them. She is working with the buyer. The buyer's in her car. She's taking her to look at houses. She knows the seller. Jamella's sign is in the yard. The name of the company, Premier Realty, is on the sign, and so is Jamella's name is also on the sign. But guess what? Because Jamella is affiliated with Premier Realty, and because Premier Realty is the agent, that means that Jamella is a subagent. That means that Jamella is part of this big company, this big brokerage, and they act like one big family. But we might call it instead, one of my students taught me this, instead of calling it one big family, we're going to call it one big firmily. Isn't that cute? One big firmily. Because they're one big firmily, Premier Realty, that means that Jamella, not only is she representing her personal buyer and seller, by default, Jamella is also representing all of these sellers, this buyer and two sellers, this buyer and two sellers, this buyer and two sellers, and this buyer and two sellers. Because Jamella is part of this family, by default, she represents all the buyers and sellers that are being helped by Premier Realty brokerage. And the same holds true for all of the other affiliated brokers. This affiliated broker also represents Jamella's buyer and seller. by default because they're one big family. Now we know in North Carolina, because we practice agency, in a real estate transaction, a real estate broker must represent somebody. And they could represent the buyer, the seller, sometimes both. That's dual agency. Sometimes buyers decline representation. That happens. Or sometimes a brokerage may only represent sellers. That's pretty rare, but that happens as well. Okay, let's go with the first scenario. Let's say we're dealing with a buyer who declines representation. Come on over here and say that Jamella, in our example, okay, so broker Jamella, make sure we know that she's a broker in this example. Broker Jamella meets a consumer. Here's how the flow goes. It could be, let's say it's at an open house or some such thing. So Jamella meets a consumer. We hit, or prior to sharing sensitive information, Jamella does the right thing and goes over the working with real estate agents disclosure, which is simply a review of how real estate brokers can behave in a transaction in North Carolina and what a particular brokerage offers in terms of representation. And then once she goes over that consumer protection information, Jamella asks the question, do you want me to represent you in a transaction, yes or no? Well, let's pretend that this person right here, which is very unusual, but it could happen, this person says, no thanks. I do not want representation. That means that Jamella is working with an unrepresented buyer. And this, by the way, scenario is accounted for on the Working with Real Estate Agents disclosure form, and you can find a copy at the North Carolina Real Estate Commission's website, ncrec.gov. So Jamella is working with an unrepresented buyer. What can Jamella do with this unrepresented buyer? Can she do anything with this unrepresented buyer? Guess what? She sure can. Jamella can show this unrepresented buyer all of these listings, and the S stands for sellers, and these sellers have houses for sale. Jamella can show this unrepresented buyer all of these listings inside of her brokerage. Why? Because Jamella represents all of these sellers by what? By default. Because she's part of what? One big family. Who's the family? Premier Realty Brokerage. Isn't that something? That right there is an example of brokerage sub-agency within your brokerage. Now, where it gets tricky is if Jamella shows this unrepresented buyer, let's call this person Benedict the buyer. Right here, okay? Jamella shows Benedict all of these listings inside of her brokerage, which she can do because she represents them by default as a broker affiliated with Premier Realty Brokerage, one big family. But you know what Benedict says? Benedict says, ugh, bleh, 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 bleh. I don't like any of your listings, Jamella. What Benedict says. And then Benedict comes to Jamella later and says, I want you to show me a property listed by not Premier Realty, but Mountains to Sea Realty. Now what? Benedict, as we established, did not like any of the listings offered by Premier Realty. And instead, Benedict said, I want to see property listed by this other brokerage. I believe we called it Mountains to Sea Brokerage. That's going to take us to our next category of seller sub-agency, and this one is called seller sub-agency. Except this one is with another brokerage. How does that look? Well, let's say that buyer Benedict sees this house over here. Okay, and this is with Mountains to Sea Realty or Brokerage. Mountains to Sea Realty, that's the brokerage. We have established that broker Jamella is affiliated with Premier Realty. That's her brokerage. We've established that broker Jamella represents all of the buyers and sellers that are working with Premier Brokerage by default because they're one big firm elite. We've also established that buyer Benedict wants to be unrepresented. So he's an unrepresented buyer. What can broker Jamella do? Buyer Benedict wants to see this house listed by Mountains to Sea Realty. Now, broker Jamella could refer buyer Benedict to Mountains to Sea Realty. She could refer. However, broker Jamella has already shown buyer Benedict probably 25 houses. So she would like to be compensated for her work, wouldn't she? She's not going to be compensated as robustly if she refers buyer Benedict to Mountains to Sea Realty. Instead, she wants to participate fully in this transaction. Currently, though, she may not show buyer Benedict this property listed with Mountains to Sea Realty. Why? Because, as we established earlier, in North Carolina, all brokers have to represent somebody. So let's check what we know so far. Broker Jamella does not represent the seller of this house that's listed by Mountain to Sea Realty because she is not affiliated with Mountain to Sea Realty. She represents all of the clients that are working with Premier Realty. So she doesn't represent a seller at this point. Let's look at the buyer. Buyer Benedict says buyer Benedict wants to be unrepresented. So she doesn't represent the buyer either. Broker Jamella is just flailing out there in no person's land. She's just flailing around in no person's land. She can do nothing at this point except refer, and she doesn't want to do that. What she can do, which seems fascinating, and it is totally legal, is she can, watch this, she can call Mountains to Sea Realty on the phone and say, hey, Mountains to Sea Realty, this is Jamella over at Premier Realty. Do you all offer seller subagency? Let's pretend they say yes. Yes, we offer seller subagency. Well, that's great because I have a buyer customer, unrepresented, who wants to see your house at 123 Main Street. Mountain to Sea Realty says, great. Broker Jamella says, may I ask what your compensation is for someone working with a buyer? Mountain to Sea Realty says, who knows what they say? We'll pretend it's 3.5%. Yes, we're willing to pay someone working with a buyer 3.5%. Well, that's great. I'll get something in writing. She follows up with something in writing. Because she has permission from Mountain to Sea, I know it seems strange, but because she has permission, broker Jamella can now go ahead and show this property. Yay for us. She can show this property to buyer Benedict. She can assist buyer Benedict with any and all paperwork. She's going to owe buyer Benedict honesty, fairness, and disclosure of material facts. But the question is, who does broker Jamella represent? We know she has to represent someone. One more time. Buyer Benedict said, no to representation. No, thank you. So broker Jamella asked, will you let me be on your team? Will you let me represent your seller just for this transaction temporarily? So in this situation, now broker Jamella is over here on Mountain to Sea Realty seller's team. She reps the seller. Isn't that something? Now you might think, can seller sub-agency cause some problems, Kelly? Yes, absolutely can cause some problems. Like what, you may wonder? Well, does the seller even know broker Jamella? Does the seller know anything about her work ethic or what kind of an agent she is? What if broker Jamella turns out to be a total train wreck of a broker? What if broker Jamella causes all manner of problems and maybe it even leads to civil court case or some such thing? Oh my stars. That means that Mountain to Sea Realty could be brought in as part of that civil lawsuit. So could the seller of 123 Main Street listed by Mountain to Sea Realty. So there could be a lot of vicarious liability involved for allowing seller subagency. Not only that, the Real Estate Commission would like to remind us that there's a really good chance that Mountain to Sea Realty, their errors and omissions insurance policy, known as E&O insurance, may not cover any problems caused by Jamella because Jamella is not part of Mountain to Sea Realty. How do you like them apples? So that is my example of seller subagency with another brokerage. If you have found this review of brokerage subagency and seller subagency helpful, let me know in the comments, please. And if you have any other ideas or hot topics that you would like to have reviewed, please drop those in the comments as well. I love to leave these videos for y'all, and I'm happy to do it. Have a wonderful day, and I look forward to seeing you in class.